Welcome to Go Solo Live.
Don't you mean go solo live? Have you ever been asked why on earth would you travel alone? Go Solo Live not only answers that question, but celebrates life as a midlife solo traveler. This is a safe place for women to come together to reminisce about their travels, encourage others to travel, and to dig into the real lessons learned from these journeys. Now join Jennifer Buchholz with Transform Via Travel as she and her guests share stories of the solo travelers of midlife women.
Hello, sisters, and welcome to Go Solo Live. This is Jennifer Buchholz with Transform Via Travel. It's time to sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and enjoy my conversation with Amy Hogan as she shares about getting on public transportation in Taiwan alone and other stories of personal breakthroughs. I love sharing stories on Go Solo Live. If you love them as well, please consider making a small financial contribution to help support the show. You can go to www.patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Go Solo Live and show your love. There are some great gifts of appreciation, and I appreciate your support. Hi, everyone. I am so excited. Today we have Amy Hogan joining us from Toronto, Canada. Welcome, Amy.
Thanks for having me, Jennifer.
I'm so glad to have you here today to share some of your stories. And what I love is when I looked into you a little bit more as a breakthrough coach, I'm going to be expecting to hear a lot about breakthroughs in your travels.
Awesome.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we had a chance to talk a little bit off air before we got started. And so I know bits and pieces, and now we're going to share the whole story together to the audience. I'd love to hear where you started. Where were you at in your life when you embarked on your first solo travels? Or if it's not the first, maybe the most significant.
So I would say my first solo travel was maybe about 4 years ago. So I'm 37. So I was in my early 30s. And I went to visit my sister who was living in Taiwan. So I went, traveled over there to visit her and did some solo traveling around while I was there. And I think the biggest thing for me when I was over there was navigating their subway system. And I remember I was at some a monument or some historical site that was a couple hours away from where she lived. And I saw, I took a taxi there, but I couldn't find a taxi to come home. And I was like, I'll take this bus. So I just kind of got on this bus with random people. The drivers only spoke Chinese. There was another English-speaking family there. So I asked them where it was going. And they said it takes you to the bus depot downtown. So I was like, okay, I can do that. But then once I got there, I didn't know where to go. I wasn't sure what my sister's stop was. And I remember I had a picture of it. So I matched the symbols for her stop to the symbols that were displayed in the station. And I was like, okay, I think that's where I want to go. And it took me there and I got out and I was 2 blocks from her house. And I was like, wow, I was like, if I can navigate that, I'm good. So that was probably my first experience.
Okay, well, let's break that down for just a second. So you're in a country where you don't speak the language, matching symbols on public transportation that you happen to hop on.
Yes.
But let's talk about the areas where you probably had some confidence. You knew that if you were heading to the bus depot, you were at least probably heading in a good direction.
Yeah, I knew I was going to the general downtown area.
And you asked for help and you were able to get information that was helpful.
Yes.
And then you made an educated decision. I'm not going to say you were lucky. You made an educated decision, again, matching that on the map. Mm-hmm. And then you landed and you happened to land in the right place.
Yeah, I know. And I came up up to ground level and I was like, yeah, this is totally right. And then it's so true that you say making that educated guess. And I don't ever really remember panicking. I kind of loved the adventure of it.
Well, but that's part of this too then. So you were going in with an attitude of, well, I'm doing the best that I can. It may work out. It may not. Mm-hmm. But, and I'm assuming this was during the daytime?
Yes.
Okay. So it's also that idea of, so what is the cost of me screwing this up?
Yeah.
And so if you would have had to think about that, what were some of the costs of you screwing up that decision?
Yeah, I guess like, the cost or worst case is I ended up somewhere I didn't know, and I would have had to maybe flag down a taxi and pull out the map of where my sister lived. I don't think I had a smartphone at that time.
Okay.
And yeah, just point to it and hopefully I would get there, I guess.
Right. But not like this horrible nightmare. Like, you're not putting yourself in a very risky situation, but it's still a situation where, I mean, there is a bit of risk involved. It's just maybe not risk of personal safety.
Yeah, I didn't feel ever like threatened or at risk or anything like that. Yeah.
So in that instance, the fact that you just said yes, you said, well, why not? I mean, you could have also chosen to just take a taxi, which would have been a sure thing.
Yeah.
And you jumped in and tried something different. So then what did that do for your confidence level?
It just it totally skyrocketed, actually. I was like, oh my goodness. I mean, first of all, I'm in total awe of my sister for just moving over there. I was like, what's it like, And I just thought it just gave me so much confidence to be like, okay, well, if I can do that, I can travel alone at home or other places. Like, if I can navigate the Taiwanese subway system, I'll be okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, and okay, so is your sister older or younger?
She's younger.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I don't know if you feel this at all. I'm an older sister myself, and I kind of would feel like, well, if my little sister can do it, I sure the heck better be able to.
Yeah, totally.
And so there is a little bit of like point of pride for me being like, okay, when my sister has traveled alone and told me some stories, I'm like, okay, so she's doing it. This is good. But I better be able to, I better be able to mimic that, or, I don't know if it's a ego thing. Maybe it's the big sister, little sister competition.
Totally. I'm totally in agreement with you there.
It's healthy, right? We're not going to say that it's unhealthy. That would be awkward.
No. Yeah. Totally good.
So, okay. Well, cool. So, okay. So you've navigated through Taiwan. Mm-hmm. What were some of the other experiences that you've had then during that trip?
Oh, so riding a scooter there is crazy because there's not a lot of traffic signals or no one pays attention. And you're in this massive group of people on scooters and they're zipping around. And so it was crazy fast, which was, I think I drove a scooter once maybe when I was visiting the west coast of Canada, but you're on a little trail and it wasn't a big deal, but here it was you got to go, if you stop or make the wrong move, you're going to totally wipe out. So that was something.
So you were one of those crazy people on a scooter.
Yes.
However, normally you don't tell, now I would think that this is something that the locals, that they do without a second thought, right? But how was it to be a traveler doing that?
It was kind of surreal. I almost felt like I was in a video game or something, like
Frogger?
Yeah, exactly. Gotta navigate, stop, and yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So what was your interactions then with the locals? I mean, it sounds like your sister was working. She was busy for parts of it. So you were out exploring on your own.
Yeah.
What was your experience kind of interacting with the locals then?
The Taiwanese people they were so nice. At one point, my sister and I, we went over to this other smaller island for a couple of days, and we came back and she'd prearranged a ride through somebody that spoke English, but our ride never came. And we were a couple hours from home, and the ferry dock was closing and there wasn't anything around. So we're what do we do? And, as a white person, and she's blonde, so I'm brunette because people can't see me. But she, we totally stand out. Mm-hmm. And this woman came over and, it's she knew that we were stranded. We didn't speak Chinese. She didn't speak English. And she called somebody. Kelly was able to point on the map, where we were going towards her house. Because she always kept that with her. So people knew where she lived.
That's wonderful.
This woman called somebody that she knew to come get us and drive us home.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, benefiting from the generosity and kindness of strangers.
Like amazing. So the people were so nice. And they just really, I know my sister's had a couple things where people would invite them to come stay with, invite her to come stay with them. They're very generous and very warm. So I never felt unsafe.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
Again, and this was a few years ago, but it's so important for everybody to understand what their safety comfort zone is, and then how to work, I don't know if I'd say within or around that, so that you feeling unsafe is just not a good thing when you're traveling. You don't want to have that sneaking up on you. So to be able to figure out what do you need in order to feel safe is really important.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
That's awesome. Okay, so we do Taiwan. What does that do for you in terms of, 4 years ago, where were you at in your life outside of travel? What else was going on in your life at that time?
Yeah, good question. So I was in my 9-to-5 job. I'd been there for probably around 8 to 10 years at that time. And, it was my first, this was the place I went to after university. It was my first big, real adult job.
Mm-hmm.
And I was feeling very kind of restless. I was bored. I didn't necessarily have a lot of adventure. I was at the point where friends are having kids. I'm married, but I don't have kids. And I just felt like, okay, this all there is to life, and going there, it was like, wow, that was such a cool adventure. And it made me super appreciative for home and the comforts that we have. But I was kind of like, okay, so what now? What's next? Because it kind of just sparked that adventure bug. Yeah.
Okay. So it sparked the adventure bug for you. So what did come next?
So actually, fast forward a couple of years later, and I ended up leaving that job to start my own business as a coach, life coach. And that was a big step.
Of course.
Yeah.
So what was I'm not even going to say the trigger. What were some of the things that as you were going through this process, and if you can kind of bridge the gap between doing that travel and maybe it's about perspective, maybe it's about confidence, whatever that is, but that helped empower you to take that leap?
I think it was the confidence and maybe something around the self-trust of knowing that whatever happened, I would be okay. And almost feeling maybe it was traveling somewhere where you kind of see how people live totally different from us. And I came back here and I was like, wow, we have a lot of stuff. And our stuff seems very luxurious to the way some of those people lived. And I was like, you know what? I have a lot. I'm so thankful. No matter what happens, I'm going to be okay.
Right.
And I think it was I didn't want to have trips like that once a year, you have your 4 weeks vacation and 2 weeks, 2-3 weeks a year are used to go on this big trip. I wanted it more regularly.
Well, and I'm going to Americanize that statement for just one moment. So let's take just 1 second, and can you please just repeat what amounts of vacation that you typically get?
So I had 4 weeks.
You had 4 weeks of vacation. So typically, and I'm not going to say, as people progress in their careers in the U.S., this does adjust accordingly, but typically you're going to see people in the U.S. starting with 2 weeks of vacation.
Yes. So I started with 2, and then 10 years later, I'd finally worked up to get 2 more.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, and for any of you out there in the same boat that Amy was in at some point, thinking about, I may be considering leaving my traditional job and looking for something else. One thing I will tell you is whether you decide to go independent in your own work or whether you're going to join another organization to find something more fulfilling, negotiate your vacation time from the beginning, because you will never be able to negotiate it in the same way that you can when you're applying, and getting that job for the very first time. Fair advice?
So true. Such amazing advice. Totally. Yes.
It's something that I think I've never heard somebody regret, I negotiated too much vacation time.
No.
Never heard that.
Never happened.
So yeah. And again, there's a lot of people, a lot of my listeners are in that space of, I'm not sure what's supposed to come next for me. And travel is one way to start to look for that and to find that. And so whatever you're deciding comes next, one of the things that I want to encourage, and one of the reasons why I so encourage solo travel, is it allows you to do it on your own terms. Yeah. But first you have to be really clear on what those terms are. What do you value? What is most important? And so a friend of mine recently was a VP in HR, and she decided that she no longer wanted to be location bound, and negotiated that she was going to transition out of that role in a year's time and, she was never going to leave them high and dry. But as part of that negotiation, she said, I will be flying into the office once or twice a month. Other than that, I will be working from wherever I'm located. And she's super valued in her organization and had been with them for like 20 years. And so they were like, well, sure. And it's worked for over a year for both of them. Now, this isn't necessarily what she wants to be doing forever, but it provides her a lot of the comfort and security of a regular paycheck and vacation time and things like that. But she's now living where she wants to be living rather than being location bound.
Wow. Again, it gives you so much time for all those other things, if it's travel or adventure or whatever.
Well, even the flexibility, some people can work from home, some people can't, but even the flexibility of cutting out a commute can give you hours back that you can then reappropriate to finding adventure even in your own backyard.
That's so true. Yeah, because I used to spend like an hour and a half to 2 hours on the highway every day driving to my job. And I never realized how much I was in the car. It's like, oh my gosh, like this is far where I used to go. And I never realized, because you just get up and do it without thinking about it.
And let's be clear, I love people in cars because that's where a lot of people listen to podcasts. So thank you to every single person. I salute you. I am drinking a sip of coffee for you right now.
Yes.
But I also recognize that maybe you'd rather be out walking and listening to this fabulous podcast than, in your car on your way to or from work stuck in traffic.
Totally. Or I listened to a bunch of your podcasts on the airplane traveling, which was so cool. Yeah, it was awesome. I was like, I got 5 hours. Like, let's do this. It was so good.
That's awesome. So when you I want to think about like worldview. You've talked about how you have been able to gain the confidence and even test some of that in your travel. What do you think it's done in terms of worldview? The idea of we have too much. Mm-hmm. What else?
The first thing I remember when I got off the airplane, like back here in Toronto, I was like, oh my God, the air is so fresh. And it was still summer air, like maybe not quite too like muggy or smoggy yet, but it still felt so fresh. So it made me realize like how important it is, like in terms of like the environment and air pollution and that kind of thing. I was like, because they would get they have a lot of industry there, and being close to China, like the air quality is just not great. So we had like crazy good air quality here. It also made me realize, like we do have a lot. So I was super thankful in terms of like the house that I live in and the things that I have. And it also made me realize, like everyone talks about, oh, Canadians are so nice. But like the Taiwanese were just so nice, so it kind of made me think like, okay, maybe we're not as warm and friendly. I mean, sometimes we are, yes, but maybe not as much as we think we are. Like it gave me something to learn about being compassionate for, like we have a lot of newcomers, like especially living in a big city in Toronto. And it's funny, actually, I remember being in the subway system not that long after I had that trip, and someone like asked for help in terms of navigating. And I remember taking extra time to help him because I was like, oh, I totally know how this feels. So I kind of like walked him part of the way and made sure he knew and pointed to the stop. Like it made me take extra time with him and not be so like, oh yeah, it's down there, kind of dismissive. And maybe he'd be like, well, people have really helped me. And I really wanted to help him in return.
That's really generous. It's really generous to think in that way, for sure. Mm-hmm. And I so appreciate you talking about the the environment, because I will tell you too, spending time in New Zealand and in other European countries, just the fact that you walk out of your hotel room and when your key comes out of the slot, you've turned off all the power in that unit. And the power doesn't come back on until your key goes back in and you've activated it again.
I love that.
And I'm like, why is this not a common practice? And in Europe, I found it everywhere. And in New Zealand, it was just kind of the same thing. The respect for the environment was so much higher.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't prepared to look at my world differently in that respect. And I'm so glad that I've had that, those examples to be able to refer back to, because I'll tell you, it has changed, some of my behavior at home for sure.
That's so interesting. I remember being somewhere and now I can't recall where it was, but it was the same thing. You had to put your key, because I was like, oh, the lights won't work, but you had to put your key in the slot by the door. And it was such a good reminder, to turn those things off. And I just thought it was so cool how it was built in, knowing like, human error, we might forget. It's just kind of like built into the system. It was so cool.
Well, and, there is something to be said for what we consider our creature comforts, and the idea that water is such an available resource. I live right near the Great Lakes. We do not have a huge concern about water, but that doesn't mean that in a global perspective that I shouldn't be more aware of water usage and to go to places where you're not drinking water from the faucet. Or, that when there is scarcity, you become so much more aware of where you have abundance.
Mm-hmm. And it's so true what you said about water from the tap. Like here, when I'm at home, you can just drink water from the tap, but it's not like that everywhere. And you have to be so aware of maybe the safety or, what it's like.
Well, and the other example from that is littering. And I'm a scuba diver, so I really care about my ocean. And I had not realized, you always see the news about, the litter in the ocean, the plastic in the ocean, and some of the amazing innovations that are coming out with that. But when I was in Fiji and I just saw the whole shoreline littered, and in some cases it was bottles of Fiji water, the empty plastic bottles of Fiji water washed up on the shore of Fiji. And I thought, what are we doing? This is our planet. And I don't consider myself a huge environmentalist. I mean, I like green, but I'm not gonna go tie myself to a tree. But to be having that awareness right in front of you, like how you can't ignore it.
That's really powerful. Yeah. I think it's once you see it firsthand.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's a little bit about worldview. And so you've talked a bit about how, as you've traveled, you have now shifted out of your corporate life and your 2-hour-a-day commute, and you have some other stuff going on. And we'll talk about your business in general, but can you just talk about like that process of personal growth?
Yeah, where I was in this like 9 to 5, wasn't feeling super fulfilled. I was kind of bored. And it's exactly what you said, like, what do I value and what's most important? So I had all the things that I thought should have made me happy. Like, I'm married to a great man, have a nice house, had a good job. I kind of had all those things that you like spend your 20s going for, and then you have it. And it's like, okay, so now what do I do? Do I want to stay here for the next 35 years of my life? Like, the thought of that seemed kind of like a slow death, and I know people will say like, oh, it's about your mindset and how positive you are and yada, yada. And I do believe that to some extent, but I just thought I didn't really feel like I was making a difference. And interestingly enough, I did work in the environmental sector. I worked for government and sustainability and climate change.
Sure.
So I did feel that greater purpose of like saving the environment and creating a really great community where I worked. It's like, maybe it was the government side of things. It was just really slow changing. And I just thought, am I really making a difference? Like, is what I'm doing going to matter? I just didn't feel like I was making that difference that I wanted to make. And that's when I discovered coaching.
So there was a deeper sense of purpose. And you were already doing work that had purpose.
Yeah, I know. And some people are like, wow, that's really great. I'm like, it is, but it's something, it just wasn't enough. Like I wasn't seeing the change on a regular basis. I didn't,
Absolutely.
maybe see the results of what I was doing and I think that's why I love coaching, because it's a conversation, and you can change people's life, and people's lives change with one conversation every day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's fantastic. So when you talk about your travels with others, what do you consider to be some of your highlights? We can talk about another trip if you'd like, if there's, another like momentous, like aha moment that you've had.
Yeah. So probably the biggest momentous aha moment for me is this past summer, last August, I went on a horseback riding trip to Iceland. And that was with a company like based here in Canada, Wild Women Expeditions.
Awesome.
Yeah, like such a fun name too, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And it reminded me when you had that guest on a couple of weeks ago about solo together. So yeah, it was like women that wanted adventure, they wanted travel, and they might be married, they might have partners, they might have a family, and they didn't necessarily have anyone in their life that wanted the same things that they wanted on a trip. And it was like, so I was leaving my job and I booked this trip. So I left my job in July and then the trip was in August. So it was kind of like this time in my life where that marked like, okay, like this is the next part of your life.
Got it.
Was so like such a big, like momentous part of my life. And I didn't really know how to horseback ride. Like I took a couple lessons before I went, and everyone was like, are you going to be okay? And I was like, yeah, like it's going to be great. I read the description. I was like, oh, it just sounds so majestic, and the horses, and like, I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get there and I felt like, oh my God, like I think I'm in over my head. It was
good. You should feel like that, right?
Yeah.
Like that's part of this process.
Yes. I just thought, wow, like I'm not as comfortable around the horses as I thought. Most of the people seemed to have more experience. There was only a handful of us that came alone. Someone had come with a friend, or there was a mom and daughter, or they came with other friends. So
okay.
Yeah, so there was maybe only a couple of us that actually had come alone and didn't know anybody. And for me, there was so many times when I was like riding through the mountains. There's this one place called the Valley of the Horses, which is only accessible like on horseback.
Okay.
And we're riding through there and you're kind of in this valley and it's like lush green hills and there's sheep, and it was really raining that day. It was like sideways rain. But I just thought, I can't believe I'm here. Like a month ago, I was sitting at my desk and now I'm on horseback with a bunch of people I don't know going through the mountains of Iceland. Like this is crazy. And I just felt so alive, like something I said I was going to do. And now I'm here and I'm doing it. It was so amazing.
Absolutely. So I believe you have a significant other in your life, Amy.
I do. Yep.
And what did your husband have to say about you traveling alone, gasp, as a married woman?
I know. It's funny. People would be like, oh, is Mike going on this trip with you? And I said, no, it's women only. And since then I've traveled a lot on my own, and people ask like, oh, what does Mike think of that? And he loves it. It was so funny. I remember when I came home from Iceland and he picked me up from the airport, he's like, oh my God, like you look so happy and like, you just look so hot. And, like maybe just like the fresh air and the exercise. And like, I was just had this glow. And it seems like to be a bit of a turn.
He felt it for you.
Totally.
And what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I think he finds it a bit of a turn on, like knowing that like I'm a strong, capable woman. I can do these things. I can take care of myself. So that's awesome too.
I would like to start using that in my marketing at this point, is that solo travel can be a turn on.
Right? Totally. I mean, what's hotter than someone when they come back and they're like totally lit up and they're just have all this energy and like, you just want to be around them. Right.
Without a doubt. And they're, I don't know if I want to use the word carefree, but they do. I think you come back from that lighter. And that makes you like open to whatever those other possibilities are. And I think that's Yeah, that's great that your husband recognizes it and like encourages it.
Yes. And I think too, it is kind of what you said, a bit of that carefreeness. Like you've maybe discovered more of your values and what's important. So some of the stuff that used to bother you when you left, it doesn't really bother you anymore because you're like, oh, that's not important, or it's not a big deal anymore. So you're generally happier. Yeah.
Well, which makes you a better contributor in a relationship.
Totally.
So how does your husband use the time when you travel solo?
Good question.
Or is that still a secret?
No. I think when I was gone on the Iceland trip, he was up at our cottage a lot. So he's a big water skier. So he was with his friends all the time. Like he was like Mr. Social up there and he could kind of do whatever he wanted. And he was water skiing a lot and he was with his friends. And it's almost like it's cool because then you actually miss each other. So it's great when you come back. But it kind of gave him a time to do all the things like that he would want to do or, not worry about me. Like he could do his own thing too.
Well, and that's part of it. So it's not really just this one-way street where your partner is sitting at home twiddling their thumbs, like just waiting for you to come back.
Yeah. And it's funny because I think I would feel the same way about like it being a turn on, like knowing that he's having a great time and like water skiing and hanging out with his friends and doing what he wants. I'm like, good for you. I don't necessarily want someone that's sitting at home where I'm like the only thing they have going on, right? Like let's do have our own things and still be together.
Absolutely. And I think that makes things more interesting for everybody as well.
Yeah. And then you actually have stuff to talk about when you come back, right?
Right.
It's like, tell me about this and that. And it's exciting. It like adds a new level to your relationship, I think. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's something that, we don't have it in common. So you get to learn about that from each other again, because partly, I don't know, I'm in a newer relationship. We've been together just a couple of years, but one of the things that makes it interesting is that we're not together all the time. So we get the, I want to still learn about you. And we don't get the, can you pick my socks up off the floor every single day? It's like this, it's a little bit of this freshness, this fresh opportunity to explore. Because otherwise, sometimes in a relationship, you get stuck in the socks on the floor.
Yeah, like kind of stagnant. And I think when you're traveling, like you're discovering new things about yourself. And then it's just new things to bring to the relationship.
Well, and honestly, I think if somebody's not supportive of that, and if that's important, those new things that you discover about yourself, there's an opportunity for those to bring you closer together because you're sharing them, or there's an opportunity for them to be divisive. Mm-hmm. And in that supportive environment, you're able to share that and explore that rather than have to go away in order to satisfy some need. Now you get to.
Exactly. And like, I don't want to feel guilty when I'm gone. I want to be like fully immersed and fully into it and know that whatever's going on at home is good. Like there's other trips where I've gone on where it's like, I know I'm not going to be available to be in communication. So I've had to kind of let him know that beforehand, like, hey, I'm going to be in this, especially with coaching, like I'm going to be in this personal development thing. It's going to be super intense. You probably won't hear from me all day. Maybe not till tomorrow.
Yep.
And it's like, that's okay. Like sometimes it is just because you know what it's like to be the one at home. You're like, oh, will I hear from them? So it's kind of cool to set that up ahead of time. So then you're both in agreement of what's happening and there's no like bad feelings because you both know what's happening.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm with you 100% on that. Yeah. That's fantastic.
You're going to be on the boat, right? You're going to be like scuba diving or you might not be around all the time. Available. Yeah.
So what do your friends think aside from, your husband not going with you? What do your friends think when you're telling them that you're going solo?
It's interesting. When I told them I was going on that trip in Iceland, they're like, oh, that is such an Amy Hogan thing to do. And I thought, really? And they're like, yeah, you're always wanting to do things that are different or, go on some type of adventure. So in a way, it kind of made me feel like, oh, maybe people see me differently than I see myself. Like they think like, yeah, you go for it. Whereas
Isn't that nice?
It is. It was really like, wow, like they really believe in me.
That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big deal. How exciting that like to have your name associated with something, like that's a pretty great thing to have your name associated with.
Yeah. And I think people started to be like, wow, like, I don't know. I find it kind of inspires other people as well.
Right.
When you hear about like, oh, a really big trip, or I know one guest that you had, she would, just go away from her family for a couple of days at a time. Like, I'm sure when she tells other moms or like women in her life that she's doing that, they probably think like, oh, like what can I do? That's really cool. Like knowing that other people are doing it kind of gives you the permission that maybe you're on some level seeking to go do that for yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I want to make sure that you get a chance to share with my listeners a little bit about the work that you do. Can you tell us about your business? And then we'll get into how to contact you and any other events that you have coming up as well.
Sure. Yeah. So I've had my coaching business for about a year. I call myself a breakthrough coach, as you mentioned, and that is really about kind of creating those breakthroughs for people or having them create it for themselves with me, similarly to kind of the things that happen to you when you're on vacation. It's like seeing yourself in a new light or seeing that you can do something in a new way. And that's actually, now that I'm saying this, that's kind of what it is about coaching. It's like shifting what you've always done, doing something different, breaking up the pattern, coming from a different place. Maybe it's a place of like love and excitement and connection, as opposed to just going through the daily grind, and looking at what you value and what's important to you and how you want to bring that into your life so that you can actually get yourself to where you want to be in life. Right. And Beautiful. I've talked to people that are kind of in the same spot, like, yeah, I'm in my mid-30s. Like I've kind of done everything that was on my list. And now what do I do? And I feel like it's bringing back that spark a bit. Travel, I definitely see as part of that too.
Right.
Like, yeah.
Well, fantastic. So where can people find you, and what do you have coming up that if they are interested in learning more, how can they connect?
Cool. Yeah. So my website is amyhogan.ca. So amyhogan.ca. And on there's actually a 5-day support series that I have that has lots of like free content, videos, and worksheets. If people are looking to, like, they know that they are kind of feeling unfulfilled or trapped in where they are, but they don't really know what to do, that's kind of like a 5-day series that gets people in to start making some changes in their life. And I actually have a retreat coming up next February. So February 2018 in Costa Rica with a yoga instructor who's a friend of mine. It's going to be like a jungle yoga adventure retreat in Costa Rica.
Jungle yoga adventure retreat in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of one word that doesn't sound awesome in that.
Right. And it's the same thing. I think it was like going on these like solo together trips. It's like, I want to create something for people to have that experience. Like, so I've gone on a couple of trips of my own, and it's like, now I want to be the creator of that. I want to hold space for that. I want to kind of make it what I'm looking for and bring those women in that are looking for the same type of thing.
So they can find out more information about that on your website.
Yes.
And all of your contact stuff will be posted in our show notes. So they just need to jump onto our show notes for Go Solo Live and they can find you there.
Yeah. Perfect.
Oh my goodness. So if we were having a conversation, we're sitting around having coffee and there's a lady at the table with us and she's just like, I've been thinking about it, but I'm just not sure that I'm ready to pull the trigger on a solo trip. What would be your words of wisdom?
I think I would go back to the words that you said. And it's like, this is something I ask my clients. It's like, what's the cost of not doing it? Wow. So are you going to be living in that place of regret or wondering? And for here, I feel like there is a big cost. You're going to be maybe unhappy or not sure. And, what is possible if you take the leap and go for it?
So, and what's the cost of not doing it? And how big a risk is it? We'll talk, and you don't have to go halfway around the world. You don't have to go to Iceland and Thailand. Or Taiwan, sorry. Yeah. But you don't have to. You can drive in your car a couple hours away, like we were talking about earlier, and just take the time for yourself.
Yeah, and like we were talking about going to the movies by yourself, like so fun, right? Like get your treats, go to the movies by yourself, kind of just start maybe easing into doing things on your own. Maybe it's taking yourself out to dinner or going to the movies. Like maybe it's like there's meetup groups. Maybe it's joining a group and going for like a hike, one Sunday afternoon, right? Like an hour away from your home. Like just start small to kind of build up that confidence and independence.
Absolutely.
And I feel like it just gets you closer to what you want. And the feeling that you're looking for when you go on these solo trips, like start doing things now that make you feel that way. And then going there won't be such a big leap.
That's fantastic. Amy, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you for having me. This has been so awesome. I love your show. It's so great.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Wasn't it great to hear the stories that Amy shared with us today? It's important to remember that if you don't take the risk, you won't realize the reward. Well, we've reached the end of today's episode, but the conversation doesn't have to end there. Go to www.transformviatravel.com to join our email list or follow us on facebook.com/transformviatravel or on Twitter @GoSoloLive. Don't forget to share the podcast with others who you think would be interested. I'd love it if you'd subscribe and provide a rating and review on whatever tool you're using to listen to the podcast. Until next time, remember, go solo, not alone.